Today we're announcing the Department of Environmental Conservation's revised recommendations for mitigating the environmental impacts of high-volume hydraulic fracturing. I will probably stumble on those four words a few times, but every time I'm referring to high-volume hydraulic fracturing or fracturing, that's what I'm talking about, those four words. Since Governor Cuomo extended the executive order to issue a revised SGEIS, which is the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, our staff at DEC has been working very hard to take another look at high-volume fracturing to make sure we get it right. The goal of the process all along has been to identify the risks associated with high-volume fracturing, to see if they can be mitigated in a way that protects the environment and allows this activity and the economic and energy benefits associated with it to move forward in New York. I think we've done that. We know there was inadequacies in the 2009 SGEIS. The 2011 document addresses these adequacies through more vigorous mitigation measures. In preparing the revised document, we've engaged independent consultants to perform additional research regarding various socioeconomic impacts. That is going to be plugged into this document later this summer. We've requested and received more information from the drilling industry. We've carefully considered 13,000 public comments from all stakeholders, individuals, organized environmental groups, industry experts, and municipal officials. Just grab some water. And obviously, we studied the regulations and experiences of other states where drilling has taken place so that we can learn from them. The 2011 document contains approximately 150 more pages of data and analysis than the 2009 version. And based on this new and additional knowledge, we've developed a whole series of recommendations that go far beyond what was proposed in 2009. Under our proposal, high-volume drilling would be prohibited within the New York City and Syracuse watersheds, and within 4,000 feet of that boundary. It'd be prohibited in all primary aquifers and on state-owned lands, including state parks, wildlife management areas, and reforestation areas. High-volume drilling would be permitted on private lands, but only under new, rigorous, and effective measures that mitigate the environmental impacts. We are going to do this safely. And once the final document is released, DEC will issue regulations to codify the recommendations we make in the SGEIS. So let's just go over the significant changes from version to version. The new version would protect the state's environmentally sensitive areas while also realizing economic development and energy benefits, as I mentioned before. With the changes to ensure strict mitigation and monitoring measures, we believe high-volume fracturing can be done safely in New York. More than 80% of the deep Marcellus shale areas where drilling can practically be done will still be accessible for accessing gas resources. Now that's important because we have a whole new series of setbacks from sensitive environmental areas, water supplies, steep slopes, you name it. We have setbacks from all the sensitive areas. But even after all of that, we believe you can get to 80% or more of the resource. So I'm just going to discuss a few of the changes in more detail. There's currently 8 states with high-volume fracking underway. And in effect, New York is really the only remaining state that has the potential for high-volume fracking. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, shale gas production comprised 16% of total U.S. production. By 2035, the EIA estimates that shale gas production will grow to 47% of total U.S. production. In the Marcellus Shale, well sites have been developed extensively in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. Those dots represent well pads, in effect. And you can see, obviously, high clusters of them across Pennsylvania. You even see some in New York, but those are not high-volume, hydraulically fractured sites. Those are vertical wells, which have been happening in New York for years. Last month, DEC staff and I visited Leroy Township in Bradford County, as I was directed to do so by the governor. We learned what went wrong there with when fracturing fluid released and escaped to a nearby waterway. We didn't just stop and look at that one site. We looked at all of the incidences that have happened in Pennsylvania and elsewhere to make sure we knew as best we could what happened, what the problems were, and how to correct them in New York so they wouldn't happen here. We incorporated specific controls into the revised document to address all those errors that we found in other places. These include better stormwater controls, more rigorous equipment testing before it's used in the drilling process, and increased monitoring by DEC staff. So what are the specific controls and measures that we're recommending to safeguard the environment? Our top priority, obviously, is drinking water. As I said, surface drilling will be prohibited in the New York City and Syracuse watersheds. It'll also be prohibited 4,000 feet around those watersheds. This is obviously a significant departure from the 2009 draft. These water systems, the Syracuse and New York, are the only unfiltered water systems in New York State. They are two of a few around the nation. They are unique, they are precious, and they are unfiltered. So we concluded that it was just inappropriate to drill in those watersheds. Surface drilling will also be prohibited in the state's primary aquifers and within 500 feet of their boundaries. Now, primary aquifers presently serve municipalities. They are a main source of drinking water, as opposed to principal aquifers, which we've also have strict new regulations on. Principal aquifers are basically backup aquifers. They are not used at present, but obviously represent a future potential. As I've stated also, high-volume fracturing wells will not be sited on state-owned lands, such as state parks, forests, and wildlife management areas. This industrial activity is simply inconsistent with the purposes for which these areas were acquired and the public's use of them. Remember, though, that even with these restrictions, 80% or more of the deep Marcellus shale is still accessible. And it will be allowed on that private land with very rigorous and effective controls, which we think are state-of-the-art in the country. Permits won't be issued for sites within 500 feet of private water wells or domestic use springs. Another new measure we've added to protect drinking water is additional intermediate well casing that will be included to prevent gas migration. This intermediate well, or intermediate casing rather, is just yet another layer of protection between water supplies and gas that's underground. It hasn't necessarily been used in all cases in the past, and a lot of the incidents where there was well migration, or gas migration rather, in places like Pennsylvania were because of either intermediate casing wasn't used or there was things like improper cementing, all of which we address in the SGIS. Let's see. So this means, by the way, when intermediate casing is included, there'll be 3 layers of casing used in a well: surface casing, intermediate casing, and the production casing. Each one of those casing layers, it's literally a pipe that goes down into the well, is then cemented to prevent any migration in or out of that pipe. Rigorous containment measures will be required for all fracturing additive containers, staging areas, flowback storage tanks to ensure that any spills of wastewaters or chemicals at the well pad do not migrate into water supplies. This is what a typical well pad looks like. You can see the berm around that pad. In the case of Leroy, Pennsylvania, at the Chesapeake site, it was that containment area that actually sloughed with all of the advent of spring rains and spring thaw. The berm area actually settled in the corner of the containment area, and when they were overwhelmed with stormwater and the fluids leaking out on site, it actually breached that berm and flowed down the hill and into an unnamed tributary of the Towanda Creek. And the problem in that case was defective equipment. There was a flange on the pipes at the top of the apparatus above the well that actually breached and leaked, and the leak took about 12 hours to contain. We're also proposing a new set of strong stormwater controls and increased regulation of water withdrawals. Following the governor's signing of DEC's water withdrawal legislation, which the state legislature recently approved unanimously, a special permit will be required to withdraw large volumes of water for industrial and commercial purposes to ensure that there aren't any adverse impacts. All withdrawals from surface water bodies will be subject to strict limits to ensure that natural flows are maintained so that fish and other aquatic resources can be protected. Excuse me. Since the 2009 SGIS, many drilling companies have started to recycle much of the flowback water, greatly reducing the need for However, we do have new proposals on how to handle any flowback waste. First, applicants must have a DEC-approved plan for disposing of flowback water and production brine. DEC would institute a process to monitor disposal of flowback water, production brine, drill cuttings, and other drilling wastes. This process would be similar to how medical waste is now handled. It would have to be manifested. They would have to have a plan for where it's going to go and demonstrate that the receiving entity has the proper permits and the capacity to treat those wastes. Finally, we will continue to require that any and all waste proposed to be disposed of at a wastewater treatment plant are fully assessed and that effective treatment systems are in place and permitted before drilling wastes are accepted. All drilling waste applicants would be required to submit a plan, as I just said. This would include an extensive review at the treatment facility itself, known as a headworks analysis, to make sure that the treatment plant can treat the type of waste that are coming into it. And they'll be tested before they come so that they'll know what the constituents are. There's also new protections for air. The new recommendations in our SGEIS will require enhanced air pollution controls on all engines used at the well pads, and DEC will monitor local and regional air quality at the well pads and surrounding areas. In addition, we will require the use of existing pipelines when available rather than flaring gas to reduce emissions. And finally, applicants will be required to submit emission impact mitigation plans that include best management practice for greenhouse gas sources, a leak detection system, and the use of reduced emission completions. Another important area to consider when looking at drilling is the impacts to local governments, of course. And we saw many of those impacts when we were in Pennsylvania. The 2009 SGIS just did not adequately address these issues. And we've hired a consultant which is going to report back to us about July 31st on both the socioeconomic impacts, economic impacts, transportation, visual impacts, all the important impacts locally that we felt were just not adequately addressed the first time around. So that is a piece that will be added to the SGEIS about the end of July. We also have a provision in the SGIS for local government notification. Whenever DEC receives an application, the local government will be notified, and the applicant has to certify that their plans are consistent with local zoning ordinances. If they aren't, and they can't make that certification, or the local government disagrees with them, DEC will review whether or not they think they comply, and they will include a permit condition that specifies that they have to comply with local zoning. If they don't, those situations could very well end up in court. But DEC will make its best effort to make sure that those applicants comply with local zoning regulations.